of the Inquiry. I'm Gregory Harms. This is take 2. We recorded this yesterday, and I always watch the raw footage after I shoot. And I watched it yesterday, and I thought to myself, "Huh, this is pretty rubbish." So doing it again. Yeah. I don't even know why you need to know that, but I feel you need to know that. Full disclosure, I want to exercise transparency. So, right out of the gate, as many of you know, I asked viewers to submit questions. I thought we could do a Q&A episode where people submit questions and I'll just discuss the questions. That'd be the episode. I got one from a very young boy named, he's just not a man yet. He will be soon. His name is Leo. He submitted a question through his father, and I thought he asked a very good question, and that is that skull on my shelf real? I thought that was fantastic. So I hope you're not disappointed, Leo, but it's not real. It was 3D printed, which is kind of cool. It's not as cool as it being real, but it was 3D printed by the guy I work with when we edit the episodes. Logan is his name. And he asked me to pick something out because he was excited because he just bought this really excellent 3D printer system, and he was eager to display its capabilities. And so I picked out a skull, and can't have too many skulls. So there he is. His name is Rollins. It's my third skull. I got a skull over there. You can't see it, but that's Miles. And then I got a skull over there. His name is Sigerson. So Sigerson, Miles, and Rollins. Those are my skulls. I also have a phrenology head, which is too far away to go grab to display, but I'll throw up an image. That's what Nigel looks like. That's identical to what Nigel looks like. You'll see Nigel in movies and stuff. I've spotted Nigel, I don't know how many times, in different films and movies and series and stuff. So that's my answer. 3D printed. So I hope Leo is not too disappointed that it isn't a real skull. Sigerson looks kind of real, and Miles looks kind of real. I mean, more real than that one. Sigerson and Miles look like they could be like real human skulls, but they're not. They were just purchased. Sigerson at Walgreens. Sigerson is painted. It's not painted like bright colors, but he's painted like there's like a brushwork and a wash on him that reminded me of Cezanne. A little more about him in a minute. So I thought, God, they sell that skull at Walgreens, and it looks like a Cezanne, so I had to have it. So that's the story. I am so stoked about a documentary that's coming out. I forgot the bloody name of the documentary again. It's entitled "It's Never Over." It's a documentary about the late Jeff Buckley. For those of you not familiar with Jeff Buckley,
Hallelujah, hallelujah.
He was a singer-songwriter who tragically died in 1997 at the age of 30, and he left us with one studio album. There's some EPs and some live stuff, and then when he died, they released a bunch of like stuff as well, live stuff and some rare takes and stuff like that. But there is precisely one studio album. It's called Grace, and it is an astounding piece of work. It's just phenomenal. So if you're not familiar and you like that kind of music, then if you're into the rock and roll, then it might be up your street. You might like some Jeff Buckley. Uh, I've written about rock and roll on my blog a little bit, and I've kind of tired of it. It was a religion at one point, and now I've just lost interest. I find the art form kind of tired and at times comical, and yeah, there's nothing there for me anymore. But that Jeff Buckley record is really fantastic. Uh, yeah, I think anymore I listen to the cutoff seems to be 1959. Um, yeah, I listen to jazz predominantly. If I listen to any music at all, I listen to jazz and a very specific subgenre of jazz that is hard bop. And my guy is Hank Mobley. I think Hank Mobley is. I'm just. I think I'm happier when I'm listening to Hank Mobley. I mean, I like a lot of hard bop artists. I like, Lee Morgan and Art Blakey and Sonny Rollins and there's a whole, and Miles Davis, of course, and some of Coltrane's output. Yeah, but Hank Mobley, that's my guy. Yeah, I think a lot of people don't like jazz, and I don't know why. I genuinely don't understand why they don't like that kind of music, but I think uh, I think just a lot of people prefer, they kind of shy away from brilliance. They don't seem to want anything to do with it. And the history of rock and roll has always been, rock and roll has always been a place that, where mediocrity could flourish and you could cultivate a very successful career uh, dishing out lukewarm art. There's a lot of that, and that's very popular. You just turn on the radio. Um, yeah, classic rock FM will just serve it up all day long. Some of that stuff's good, but a lot of it's not. Um, yeah. God, I'm struggling right now to not cite examples, but I'm going to behave and not cite examples of bands and singers that I think are not great. I'm it's it. I'm struggling, but I'm not going to do it. Listen to what you want to listen to. Just throw on a Hank Mobley record. You won't be disappointed. Just listen to it. Just give it a minute. Just meet it halfway. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Okay, so the original title of this episode was going to be Art Philosophy, but I don't really think it's about that, really. When I got done yesterday shooting this episode, I was like, is that really what the episode's about? Or is it just a meditation uh, on the question, what is art? And a little bit of art history. I think that's what we're going to do. What is art? I think that's going to be the title. Because I think that's basically what it's about. I'm not going to talk about Kant. I'm not going to talk about Hume. Maybe I'll mention Plato and Aristotle, but I mean, that's not really what the episode's about. The episode's about, it's really an excuse for me to talk about art. And some of this stuff my students will find familiar because I talk about, we do a whole segment at the end of the semester. Uh, we talk about art and beauty and aesthetics and so on, and we do a lot of investigating the question, what is art? So that's what we're gonna do, I think, today. Um, so right off the bat, I just want to talk about. We're gonna start with aesthetics, and commonly that's couched in terms of beauty. So we can kind of look at those two things concurrently, uh, aesthetics and beauty. So philosophical writings on aesthetics go back to antiquity, and Plato talks about it, Aristotle talks about it. This runs the history of philosophy. But what we call art now is not anything that Plato or Aristotle would even recognize. The ancient Greeks didn't even have a word for art. You know, they they wouldn't even know what to do if you got in a time machine and went back to and found Plato and showed him a Warhol. He wouldn't even know what you were. He'd be like, "What is that?" First, you'd have to explain what a Campbell soup can was. I mean, you'd have to start from scratch. But once you got there, once once he understood what a Campbell soup can was, he still wouldn't understand. Like, that's just a perfect. He'd probably have the same opinion that he had. You know, then. I don't know why I just said then. And you have the same opinion that you're making a copy of a thing that exists and that's moving in the wrong direction, because Plato kind of gave art a thumbs down, or what we call art a thumbs down, because you're moving in the wrong direction. He wanted us to. He encouraged us to philosophically investigate what he called the forms. So that's the universal that all particular objects have in common. So you got millions of lemons in the world, but you got one concept of lemon, right? Except he wasn't really worried about lemons. He was concerned about things like justice and equality and the good and piety and these big ticket philosophical concepts. And that's what he thought we should be doing. And artists were just making copies of copies, because as far as Plato was concerned, the particular is a copy, right? All those millions of lemons in the world are just copies of the one one true lemon, if you will, the form of lemon, the one concept. But he wasn't worried about lemons. He was concerned about he had bigger fish to fry, bigger philosophical fish. So, yeah, I mean, Aristotle takes a more agreeable view of art and says that we can learn from it and we can enjoy it and so on and so forth. He talks about that in his Poetics. But yeah, Plato comes down pretty hard on poets and artists, especially in the Republic, which is a work I highly recommend. I recommend reading the Poetics too. Poetics is pretty short and easy to read, easy-ish to read, and I would recommend both. So, what are the aesthetics of something? What does that mean? Well, if we look at a car, so there's a car. The aesthetics of the car are basically the stuff that doesn't need to be there. It doesn't need a shiny paint job. It doesn't need shiny rims, flashy rims. It doesn't, there are designerly considerations as to how the car is shaped, how it's designed. So those things we consider part of the aesthetics. It needs wheels, it needs an engine, so on. It needs an exhaust system, and so on and so forth. And yes, some people who are enthusiastic about cars will talk about the sound of an engine. And there are certain companies that pride themselves on the sound of their products. Harley Davidson is one. The sound of a Harley Davidson is signature, and it's part of the experience of owning a Harley Davidson. Another one is Ferrari. The sound of a Ferrari is, you'll never forget it if you hear it. The company worked hard to make sure their cars sounded cool, and they do. You can go on YouTube and look up, Ferrari engine sound, and there are plenty of videos to listen to. So the engine needs to be there, yes, and yes, the engine can have an aesthetic appeal to it. You can chrome it out. You can, some of them look nice. You can have an aesthetic conversation about an engine or the sound of an engine, but basically, the aesthetics of a car are the things that don't really need to be there. They're there for enjoyment. It doesn't need a leather interior. And like I said, it doesn't need flashy rims. It doesn't need a shiny paint job. It doesn't need this. It doesn't need that. The things that are elemental or essential to the automobile tend to not be aesthetic or candidates for appreciation, which we'll talk about. But sometimes they can, like the engine, like the sound of the engine. Those can. So it's what we enjoy about, say, a car, or take a person, take a model. Okay, so this is different. So this is a moving target. This is physical beauty. Maybe we think this model is beautiful. Maybe we don't. If you live in Papua New Guinea, you probably just think she looks weird. If you took this image back in a time machine to, the 14th century, they'd probably think she looks weird. This is clearly targeting. This ended up, a luxury goods ad or something. It's clearly targeting, or peddling, I should say, a white European, I'm guess 90s standard of beauty. But that's a snapshot. That's a moment in time, and beauty standards are changing quite rapidly, actually, in the present. I think I've said this for a couple of years now, that the Victoria's Secret standard of beauty is doomed. That catalog is going to look straight up weird in 10 years. It's just going to look strange. It's going to look like, a throwback. It's not going to, that standard is not going to play with audiences, with consumers. Yeah, I think that's, and it's a moment in time. And so I would guess about 10 people spent time producing the image of the model. You get the photographer, someone did her hair, someone picked out her clothes, someone did her makeup, someone did the lighting. There's digital post-production. I mean, a lot of time and money and energy went into producing this image. So there's a reason for that. There's a reason why, say, Gucci or whoever spent so much money to produce this image to get it just right. And that is, the message is you need to look like her. And if you're a woman and you don't look like her, then there's something wrong with you. And you need to buy our products to get you a little closer to looking like that. Which is, I think, pretty dreadful. Men are targeted too, but women have always been. They've always had, the industries, the fashion industry, the makeup industry, so on. The beauty industry has always had women in the crosshairs, for sure. And the whole goal is to make women feel insufficient or insecure. You need to look like this woman, you know. You need to buy Gucci, you need to buy the perfume, you need to buy the makeup, and then maybe you can get a little closer to being like her. Because you're supposed to want to be like her. Well, that's changing. Thank God. You're seeing models now with, scars and stretch marks, and you see models with disabilities, and it's changing. It's changing so fast. It's changing faster now than it's ever changed, than it's ever done. It's really something to behold. Uh, what women are starting modeling careers that in the 80s, in the 90s, in the 70s, there's no way in hell they would have started a career in modeling, and now they can. You know, now they can. So that's the physical beauty is like a moving target, and it's kind of suspect in many instances, and but we find, you find in your day-to-day life, you find certain people handsome or beautiful or whatever. That's an aesthetic. There's an aesthetic to the human face, no doubt about it. Just like there's an aesthetic to cars or whatever, right? Sunsets, on anything, it could be anything. Vases, there's an aesthetic. So when we're talking about beauty, we're talking about when we approach the topic of art. They seem to run parallel for many thousands of years. That is, you could talk about beauty, and you could talk about aesthetics in art. From the oldest thing we have, which is, one of the oldest things we have, if not precisely the oldest thing we have, is the Lion Man from the Hollensteinstadel, which is a cave in Germany. They found, I think the Lion Man's about not quite a foot high, made of ivory. It features the head of a lion and the body of a man. And this represents a pretty significant cognitive leap in early humans. That is, humans, were making things that looked like they created a thing. Nothing has a head of a lion and the body of a man. They made a new thing. Now, yes, that thing doesn't exist, but you're still making stuff that looks like other stuff. This is called mimesis. This is a Greek term. And art is mimetic. That is, it's imitative. You're making things that look like other things. And art is imitative, mimetic, from the Lion Man all the way through to about the, I don't know, really the late 19th century. When you get into the 20th century, things get weird fast. But when you're talking about the sweep of art history from the Lion Man to, say, the late 19th century, you're talking about mimetic art. You're talking about making a thing that looks like a thing. And when we do that, when we look at the sweep of human artistic endeavor, minus the 20th century, and some of the late 19th century, but mostly it's mimetic even into the late 19th century. It gets experimental, no doubt, but it doesn't get really experimental until, about early to mid 20th century. We can have a conversation about beauty and aesthetics through almost all of that history. We can go back to the Renaissance. We can even go a little bit beyond, a little bit. We can go past the Renaissance. We can run all the way through to like the Dutch masters. Quick point of reference: when we say Renaissance, we're talking about the years 1300 to 1600. That's your Renaissance period. It's the tail end of the medieval period, and then a little beyond. The medieval period, you're talking about the year 500 to about the year 1500. So just to frame, keep that in mind. Medieval period 500 to 1500, and the Renaissance 1300 to 1600. But you can talk about painters producing images of things that we recognize. And even though, yes, the Lion Man doesn't exist in nature, but we can see quite clearly what the artist was doing, what the artisan was doing, what the craftsman was doing, probably a man. They just combined two things, put two things together and made a new thing. But it's still mimetic art. It's still representational. We can tell what we're looking at. We're not looking at a Jackson Pollock painting. So most of the history of art, like I said, up into the 20th century, is mimetic. If you walk around the Art Institute, well, I live in Chicago, so the Art Institute's my go-to art museum. But wherever, whatever large city you live near, chances are there's a pretty sizable, decent, hopefully, art museum. And you can see it when you just walk through the permanent collection wherever you are and look at the art from, say, the Renaissance. I'm just starting the clock there, but that's kind of arbitrary. From the Renaissance all the way through to the Baroque period and the Neoclassical period and the Romantic period and so on, and get into the later the Impressionists and the Post-Impressionists and so on. These are all mimetic, and you can have a conversation about beauty as well. If you look at the Dutch masters, if you look at Peter Claes, maybe you don't like that art, maybe you don't like that painting, but you can have a conversation about beauty. You can have a conversation about how breathtaking that painting is. Maybe you think it's rubbish, but I don't know anyone. I haven't met anyone who thinks that stuff's rubbish. They'll look at a Rembrandt and be like, that's crap. I've never met that person. When we get into like Pollock and Rothko, okay, people will get more opinionated, but not when it comes to the Baroque and the Neoclassical. There seems to be a consensus that artwork is at least rarefied, and there's a it's out of grasp. It's painting at a level that most people cannot do. And I think that that's an interesting point, that the art of, say, the Dutch masters or the Baroque painters, people like Caravaggio, people like Velázquez, you're getting into the Neoclassical period like Jacques-Louis David, or the Romantics like my beloved Caspar David Friedrich. I love Caspar David Friedrich. They're painting at a level that is beyond what most people can do. I'm sure somebody out there can paint like Velázquez or Caravaggio, but I don't think there are many people out there that can paint like those fellas. And we can have a conversation about beauty all the while, over centuries of art. We could talk about aesthetics and beauty and technique. Now, it's funny that when you get into the 20th century and things get experimental and abstract, we don't talk about the skill of the painter. Now, I think those painters were skilled, but I don't mean it in the same way that when I say Caravaggio or Velasquez or Tintoretto or El Greco were skilled painters. I don't mean it in the same way. I don't mean it in the same way. I don't mean it in the same way when I'm talking about the 20th century abstract expressionists like Rothko, like Pollock, like de Kooning. Those are skilled painters, but they're not skilled in the same way. And when we stop talking about technique, we kind of stop talking about beauty, which is, I think, interesting. It's like we don't talk about beauty anymore in art, in contemporary, I won't say modern art, I would say contemporary art or postmodern art, I think the conversation changes. I think the artists are preoccupied with something more philosophical. They were not trying to accomplish what Peter Klaus accomplished or Franz Snyder's. I don't think that's the priority. Those painters wanted to paint something that looked like a thing, and they wanted to do it in as convincing and breathtaking a way as they could possibly do it. But you don't see that in 20th century art. There are some photorealists floating around, but by and large, that's not the priority in contemporary art, in postmodern art. So let's jump in. I'm kind of itching to get to Duchamp. Let's just get to Duchamp. So Marcel Duchamp was born in France, and he really made a name for himself while he was in the United States, specifically New York. He made a name for himself with his nude descending a staircase, which had cubist sort of pretensions, but he was experimenting with motion, which is more of a futuristic concern. And so he was kind of not welcome among those, championing cubism. He was kind of shown the door. Not the first time he'd be shown the door. So the thing that Duchamp was a member of the Dada movement, and Dada was an anti-establishment, anti-art sort of movement that took place during the First World War. They were punk rock before punk rock was punk rock. They were anti-art. Their whole agenda was to destroy art and challenge art and tear things down that had been, venerated for centuries. And they wanted nothing to do with the classical. They just wanted to destroy things, and I kind of find them endearing. I like Dadaism, and I like Duchamp. So Duchamp is most famous for Fountain. There it is in all its glory. Duchamp went to a plumbing supply company, and he bought a urinal, and he took it to an art gallery, and the art gallery was having an exhibition, and the art gallery said, as long as you pay your fees, we will not reject any artwork. So Duchamp submitted this urinal that he entitled Fountain anonymously. Members on the committee said, that's not art, that's plumbing, and they They rejected the artwork. They rejected Fountain. So Duchamp took it to Joseph Stiglitz, who's a well-known photographer. He had a gallery in New York, and they said, "I'll put it in my gallery." So they took it to the Joseph Stiglitz gallery, and Joseph Stiglitz took a picture of it. And I believe that's what you're looking at, is the Joseph Stiglitz photo of Fountain. Fountain, sadly, has been lost to history. We have no idea where it is, if it even exists anymore. There's been some copies. Duchamp was later commissioned to, do some copies of Fountain, but the original Fountain is lost to history. So, when I show students, and we do this breakneck, put on a helmet sort of, review of human artistic endeavor from the Lion Man figure all the way through to, graffiti art, like street art, like Shepard Fairey and Banksy and those guys. We do everything. And there's about 100 images we could look at on the screen. And when we come to Duchamp's urinal, when we come to Fountain, we spend more time talking about that urinal than we spend on any other image. And I find that rather interesting, coupled with the fact that that urinal is in every art history book you could shake a stick at. Any book surveying art history, that urinal's in that book. It's uncanny. So with students, we there's a pause, and there's a bit of a silence at first, and then the hands start going up, and that's not art, and that's crap, and I love it, and the opinions tend to run hot and cold. So I tell the students, I'm like, look, if you think that's not art, then two things. One, I don't believe you. Because you're looking at that urinal in a different way than you look at the urinals in the men's room. You can't tell me you're not looking at that in a different way, in a different context. Because the context is precisely different. So for starters, I don't believe you. Secondly, if you say that's not art, and if you don't like it, if you think that's trash art, that's different. If you say it's not art, then you need to explain why that's not art and something else is art. You need to, find the line of demarcation between not art and art. And you need to explain why this urinal is not art. Now, you might not like it, excuse me, but that's different. You might not like it, but that's basically still makes it art. You just don't like it. You just think that's a crap piece of art. Fine. That's different. But saying it's not art, now you got a problem. Coupled, combined with the fact that I just don't believe you anyway. I don't, not that anyone should care what I think, but that statement, that's not art, is not. It doesn't. That doesn't hold any water. I don't believe you. I don't believe it. Yeah, I don't buy it. Because you're looking at the art, you're looking at the fountain in a different way than you were looking at other plumbing products. I'm going to show you some stuff that I turned into art effortlessly. And they're art now, in the same way that Duchamp's urinal is an art, is a work of art. So this starts off really the 20th century. This is 1917, and this really starts off the 20th century, and it just gets weirder from here. Manzoni, crap in a tin can. There you go. There's another one. That's Duchamp. Manzoni's just trying to outdo Duchamp, but that's all it is. And we don't even. Incidentally, we don't know what's in there. The cans are steel, so you can't X-ray them, and they're worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. So no one's going to take a can opener to one of them to find out if it's actually in there. It might be plaster of Paris. We have no idea. We don't know what's in those cans, and we'll probably never know what's in those cans. And really, does it matter what's in those cans? No, I don't think it matters. Maybe it's in there, maybe it's not. Who the hell cares? It's irrelevant. It's a Duchamp. That's all it is. I think the latest instance of this kind of, call it a stunt, would be the Maurizio Catalan's comedian, the banana. Everyone knows the banana on the wall. That was in the news big time. And people are just like, what? And if you find yourself frustrated and pulling your hair out and, well, that's not our, it's just a banana. You clearly need to brush up on your art history, because this is just the latest. There will be another one, and there will be another one, and there will be another one. The banana, Manzoni's crap in a tin can, they're all Duchamp. They're all Duchamp. Fine, you put a banana in an art gallery. Fine, you can put anything in an art gallery. And that is really the question. This gets to the root of the, what is art? Well, defining what art was from the Lion Man to the late 19th century wasn't, I'm not saying it was easy, but it was a lot more manageable to define art, because it was just, not just making things look like other things. Well, I could say just maybe, that's all they were doing, and that, I'm not saying it's simple. That includes the Mona Lisa, that includes the Sistine Chapel and ceiling and so on and so forth. I'm not saying that's easy to do. I'm just saying that's what they were doing. They were limited to making things that look like other things, And yes, that might be God on the Sistine Chapel ceiling, but we've seen an old man with a beard before, so you know what you're looking at. You're not looking at, an Adolf Gottlieb. Love Adolf Gottlieb. I'll show you some Adolf Gottliebs in a minute. So that's what they were doing from, like I said, the landman to the late 19th century. We're making stuff that looks like other stuff. Sometimes it's very impressive. The Dutch masters, for example. Peter Claus, that lemon on a plate. That's in the permanent collection at the Art Institute in Chicago. And I couldn't even tell you how many trips to the museum and how much time I've spent studying that painting and studying that plate and that picture, which I believe is pewter. It is astounding. That is as good as a human being can paint. That's it. You might not like it. Maybe you do like it. Maybe you don't like it. That doesn't really matter. At the technical level, in terms of expertise, in terms of technique, and bear in mind, those guys made their own paint. That's it. That is the tippy top. That is as good as a human being can do that. And I think, my guess is that had something of an effect on the history of art and the trajectory of the history of art. Because, these guys, that's as good as you can. That's as good as that's it. That's as good as it. This is as good as it gets. Um, and I think a lot of artists and painters looked at the at the Dutch masters and other painters, and they thought just like, wow, uh, we can't paint better than that, so we're gonna find something else to do, you know, and that's that happens in the history of art, you know. Something comes along, and then everyone sort of changes course and adjusts and pivots, and thinks, oh, we're going to do something else now. With the advent of photographic technology in the 1830s and 1840s, same thing. You got the advent of the daguerreotype, which is the first which were the first photographic images. Daguerreotypes named after Louis Daguerre, who was an artist and an inventor. And the daguerreotypes were produced with copper plates covered in silver, coated in silver, and treated with mercury vapor. And they had very long exposure times, but you could get an image. You could get a picture of a person or some objects or something. And so artists were like, why should I bother? Why should I stand at an easel for 3-4 months? I can just do that. Why do I got to paint somebody's portrait? And which would take forever. It's a very long, painstaking process if you're going to do it well. And the beginning of the photographic technology really changed the game. Another game changer was JMW Turner, Joseph Mallard William Turner. And Turner, he changed the game too, single-handedly. For the first time in art history, and this is like the 1840s, 1850s, for the first time in art history, we're talking about the paint. We hadn't talked about the paint prior. We didn't talk about the paint, with the Dutch masters or, the Baroque period or the neoclassical period, or whatever. We didn't talk about the paint. You might talk about the brushstrokes a little bit, or the, whatever, how he, captured this, that, or the use of light or something like this. But you didn't talk about the paint. With Turner, I mean, those late Turners, you just hold your thumb up and block out the subject matter, which won't take much doing. There isn't much subject matter there, and then you're basically left with an abstract painting, and the paint's on really thick, and you talk about the paint. That's new. That's new as of the 1840s. So you combine Turner with the advent of photographic technology, and yeah, it's no wonder that art went in the directions, plural, that it did in the late 19th century, certainly in the 20th century. Art just goes, almost said bananas. Oh God, that'd have been awful. Okay, I'm not gonna say bananas. Art kind of does go bananas, doesn't it? Oh my God, that's terrible. I almost said that. But then I did say it. You get into the 20th century, and you get into, like, I would say abstract expressionism is indicative. There is no subject matter anymore. Peter Claus, Dutch masters, there's subject matter. You go back to the Renaissance, it's the Virgin Mary, it's the Christ Child, it's this saint or that saint. There's subject matter. It's crystal clear. In the middle of the 20th century, in the 40s, 1940s, 1950s, there is no subject matter. You're talking about Mark Rothko, you're talking about Pollock, you're talking about de Kooning, and my beloved Adolf Gottlieb. I want to show you some Gottliebs, because I I just got a pretty good size coffee table book on Gottlieb, and I just find his work extraordinary. I just think they're beautiful pieces. So we're gonna look at some Gottliebs here. I got about 5 of them that I think hopefully you'll enjoy. I know, I can hear it already. I could have done that, you know. Well, you didn't, and I don't think those paintings I talked about this in a previous episode, but you know, if you're looking at, you know, these Gottliebs or, you know, Pollock or, you know, Rothko or something, I don't think those paintings are easy to do. And if you go way into the 20th century, like in the 80s, with Jean-Michel Basquiat, you're definitely, and I could have painted that territory. But here's an interesting tidbit. I want to share this with you. I used to show in my classes, there's a biopic directed by Julian Schnabel entitled Basquiat. It's a fantastic film. It's got one of the best soundtracks in a film I've ever heard. It's really, really well done. And Jeffrey, a very young Jeffrey Wright, plays Basquiat, and he plays him so well. I really urge people to watch this film. Okay, the point being that when they made the film, Schnabel did not secure the rights to use any Basquiats, the paintings, in the film. He couldn't use any original Basquiats. Now, Julian Schnabel was a pretty famous painter, very well known, kind of hot stuff in the 80s New York art scene. So then he kind of became a filmmaker. I think he still paints, but you know, I don't care. I don't really like his work. So anyway, Schnabel and company, because he's got a staff that works for him, they painted Basquiat copies. Now, bear in mind, these are trained professional painters. All of them. They're trained, and that's what they do for a living, is paint. Is do paintings and work for Julian Schnabel and blah, 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 whatever. So I tell the students this. I used to show I haven't shown that film in a while because I just don't think that it resonated well with university students. I just don't think they, just think they found it weird or something. So I kept showing it. But when I used to show it, I would tell the students, like, the paintings you're seeing in the film aren't Basquiat's. They're copies of Basquiat's done by Schnabel and company. And so some students would, come up to me after class and be like, "We want to look at real Basquiat's." And I'm like, "Oh my God, you go online. There's a ton of stuff to look at online." So I encourage you to do so because I think you'll find his paintings quite rich. And so a number of students went online and found, there's tons of stuff to look at, real Basquiat's. And they would come back to me. And these are college kids. They don't know zip about art. To quote a Wes Anderson film, you wouldn't know chiaroscuro from chicken giblets. Does anyone get that joke? Does anyone get that reference? That's from Grand Budapest Hotel. You wouldn't know chiaroscuro from chicken giblets. They wouldn't know chiaroscuro from chicken giblets. They're just college kids. They don't know zip about art. They couldn't fill a teaspoon with what they know about art. I'm not saying they're dumb. They just don't know much about art. I know for a fact. I got that pic out of my head now. You wouldn't know chiaroscuro from chicken giblets. What a great line. At any rate, so the students would come back to me and they would go look at Basquiat's, and then they would say, they don't look, the ones in the movie don't look right. The ones in the movie don't look right. And I thought, well, that's interesting. These were professional painters doing their utmost to copy his style. And a bunch of college kids who wouldn't know chiaroscuro from chicken giblets can see the difference. They're like, the real Basquiat's are complex and there's more there, and the ones in the movie just look thin and they're not convincing. They're not, they're not as good. The Basquiat's that we saw online are way better. So much for the I could have painted that assertion. What do you think? Isn't that something? That I find that flooring. That yeah, those Basquiat's look better. And then smash cut to the blowhard in the art gallery, the art museum. Like, oh, I gotta paint that. Like hell. Like hell, you could have painted that. Not on your best day. And this goes for, I think, the great abstract expressionists of the mid 20th century. I've already mentioned a few. I think that goes for them too. Those painters are very skilled. They're not skilled in the same way that Peter Claus was skilled, but Peter Claus is always my go-to for superlative technique. So I've mentioned Peter Claus a lot, but they're not skilled like he was. But that's not to mean that doesn't mean they're not skilled. That doesn't mean they weren't skilled. They were absolutely skilled. They just were skilled in a different way, Mark Rothko, those abstract expressionists that I mentioned, they were all obsessive and they labored over their canvases, and they did not take this lightly. They didn't. This was not a casual sort of, undertaking or whatever. This was not. This was not taken lightly. What they were doing, it was taken very seriously, and they worked on those canvases feverishly. And sadly, a number of those guys took their own lives, or just ran their lives into a wall. Just one way or the other. Suicide quickly or suicide in slow motion, but suicide nevertheless. It was a pretty intense group of fellas. Emphasis on fellas, I guess. So, what is art? I put my here. I want to read. George Dickey was a art critic, art theorist. He died a handful of years ago. He says the following. He borrows the term art world from another philosopher, art critic, art theorist, Arthur C. Danto. Dickey says the following. A work of art, in the classificatory sense, is 1, an artifact, 2, a set of the aspects of which has had conferred upon it the status of candidate for appreciation by some person or persons acting on behalf of a certain social institution, that is, the art world. Okay, so I think that's a reasonable place to start. It's an artifact. It's a candidate for appreciation. And it has this value conferred upon it by what Dickey's calling the art world and what Danto called the art world. And what's the art world? The art world is, well, everyone involved in the art, in the arts. The painters, the artists, gallery owners, museum curators, museum goers, critics, journalists, whatever. Anyone, if you think you're part of the art world, then you're part. Then that's part. Then you're part of it. That's it. That's that simple. You're part of the art world. If you set foot into an art gallery and start talking about the paintings, then, well, that's you're part of the art world. You don't need to be an artist or a gallery owner or a critic to or art theorist or something. It doesn't need to be high-minded. It can just be you and me in an art gallery saying that's rubbish, or whatever. Then now you're part of the art world. So it can be anything. And Arthur C. Danto, in a book called What Art Is, came out just before he died, in 2013, I think. Danto kind of deepens what Dickey's doing. And Danto talks about how art embodies meaning. Okay? That's sort of the way he deepens what Dickey's doing. Is he's not convinced by Dickey's thesis. Because he says, Danto says that Dickey hasn't really told us what art is. He's just saying how something becomes art. But Danto says the art has to embody meaning in some fashion. You have to allow for, so if we combine Danto's thoughts on the matter with Dickey's thoughts on the matter, I think we get to a reasonable point of departure. I think we can start the conversation there. I think those are two reasonable approaches, because it has to account for everything from the Mona Lisa to that banana. It has to account for all those things. You can't just say the Mona Lisa's art and the banana's not art, because then you're like, well, you're back to the problem of, okay, well, what is it? So all art is only mimetic? Art is only imitation? Art is only representative? Art is only stuff that I can't do and I can identify? I can identify the Mona Lisa. There she is. That's a woman in a painting. And could I have painted that? Hell no. No way. So that's art. That's a pretty crap definition of art. What doesn't allow for Duchamp? It doesn't even allow for Warhol. It doesn't even allow for the abstract expressionists. It doesn't even allow for my beloved Gottlieb. Because we're just gonna just throw out everything out of the 20th century? You say that art stopped in 1895? I don't think that's a reasonable way to tackle this problem. And I could have, I couldn't paint that. Like, people look at the Sistine Chapel like, oh, I couldn't have painted that. I look at the Mona Lisa and like, I couldn't have painted that. Yeah, you couldn't have, probably couldn't have. But I don't know how many people could. But I don't think that's the thing that makes it art. The fact that it was hard. And I don't know why people think that, why they expect that of art. Many people, I've had many conversations with many people, and they want art to have a certain mystique, to have a certain high-mindedness, to be out of reach. You look at the Sistine Chapel ceiling, and you're like, oh, there's no way in hell I could have painted that, So that's art. But Andy Warhol's Brillo boxes, that's not art? I beg to differ. I think that is art. I think we can have a pretty rich conversation about Andy Warhol's Brillo boxes. Arthur C. Danto wrote a whole book on it called Beyond the Brillo Box, and that he wrote basically the whole book is just like a meditation on this kind of art and why it is art and what's going on with that art. Danto's got some interesting things to say about the Brillo boxes. Even in that book, What Art Is, he says some interesting things about the Brillo boxes. He's quite taken with the Brillo boxes. I think they're fantastic. I like a lot of Warhol's work, early stuff, not so much the later stuff, but early Warhol. The Campbell soup cans, the Brillo boxes, Marilyn. But again, we're not talking about beauty anymore, are we? I mean, we could talk about, whether the Marilyn's beautiful, but Marilyn Monroe being beautiful and that painting being beautiful, that's two different things, isn't it? We could talk about a Rothko being beautiful, we could talk about a Pollock being beautiful, but they're not beautiful in the same way that, neoclassical or romantic painting is beautiful. Are they? They're not the same. I think artists in the 20th century weren't really attempting to produce beautiful images or produce images in a beautiful way. I think they had more philosophical, preoccupations. They had more conceptual things in mind. That's why you get, Warhol's using pop art. He's folded into that movement in art called pop art. He's borrowing from consumer goods and stuff you're going to find in a hardware store, stuff you're going to find in a grocery store. But I don't think beauty is the point. I think there's another point there, and I think it's very much art. It's just not art in the same way that Velázquez's art. I don't think we should limit the definition of art to just Velázquez, or Caravaggio, or Tintoretto, or whoever. Yes, that's art, but it's a different kind of art. And are we not allowed to do different things in art? Why can't Andy Warhol make Brillo box copies? And then we can have a conversation about what's going on with those Brillo boxes. Why can't we paint like Basquiat? Or why can't we put with Damien Hirst in the 90s, British artist, monumentally successful. You put a sheep, away from the flock. Put a dead lamb in a vitrine, and people were apoplectic. He wasn't killing the animals for the art. He had contacts with veterinarians and zoos and farms and so on, and they would give him the animals, and then he'd put them in vitrines or cut them up. Like he's got a cow cut in 12 slices, and each slice is in its own vitrine. He cut cows in half, multiple sheep, a tiger shark. These are, I think they have metaphorical, meditative value. And I don't think Damien Hirst or Warhol or Duchamp, for that matter, I don't think art has to be this high-minded. Well, I think those things can be high-minded, but I don't think they need to be beyond grasp. I don't need they don't need to be out of reach. They don't need to be El Greco. They don't need to be the Mona Lisa. I think we can have perfectly rich philosophical conversations, and I think as the 20th century progressed, I think art became more and more philosophical. It wasn't about the thing. It wasn't about the technique. It was about the idea. Was Damien Hirst even involved in putting the sheep in the tank? Probably not. He just had people do it. Warhol had an entire staff, and they were making stuff for him. He probably didn't make half the paintings. It wasn't about producing a thing. It wasn't about technique. It wasn't about skill. It was about the idea. The ideas drove the art. And you see that, and it runs through the 20th century. And it starts with Duchamp. I would think, it's an idea. It's a concept. Art. So the conversations veer away from beauty and approach the philosophical, but I think that's what the artists were doing. You're kind of watching art become a kind of applied philosophy. And it becomes about it's about the idea, not painting a masterpiece. Nobody paints masterpieces anymore anyway. Who the hell paints like, Peter Klaus or Frank Snyder? Nobody. I mean, well, maybe somebody out there does, but I haven't seen them. There's some photorealists floating around, but basically that kind of painting is gone. Nobody paints like that anymore. These masterpiece frescoes, like, Giotto or whatever. Nobody paints like that anymore. We're going to do something different. And that's why. That's what you get in the 20th century. You get a philosophical approach. Does this episode have any structure at all? Or is it just me talking about art? I think it's more the latter than the former. It's fine. It's fine. Oh, one more thing I want to talk about. I think this is important. Why do people get on airplanes and fly around the world to see the Mona Lisa? Why do they do that? You ever think about that? They'll fly halfway around the world just to go look at the Mona Lisa. Are they looking at the Mona Lisa? Are they there to study the painting and look at the brushstrokes and, wow, look at the use of light and, oh, her smile? That's not why. They want to be in the same room with it. That's all. It radiates value. And the assumption is if I'm in the room with it, that radiation will wash over me and improve my life in some fashion. That's why. The painting is obviously immensely famous, and I want to be in the same room with it. It's the same reason that people want to touch performing artists on stage. They go to a concert, go to the front row, and they want to touch, Taylor Swift or whoever. They want to make contact. It's a religious experience. If you go to the Art Institute here in Chicago has them. Hopefully your local art museum, whatever big city you live near, maybe they have them. They have what are called reliquaries, and they're like these fancy gold things, and they're very ornate, and they contain pieces of saints, like teeth and hair, and they become these venerated objects because they contain pieces of the saints. They're called reliquaries. And this is kind of what's going on when people want to touch Taylor Swift or go stand in the same room with the Mona Lisa. It's a religious experience. It's a religious experience. And they just want to be in the same room with it. Bloody hell. Do I do that too? I do this too. I do this too. I'll be standing in front of a Basquiat and I'll be like, I can start picturing him painting it, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm a foot away from where he was painting this. I'm in the same space as Basquiat. It's the same thing. I'm guilty of it too. I'm guilty of that. It's a religious experience. Yeah. Like the reliquaries. I want to be in this space. Like Basquiat stood right here and he was painting this painting. Or, it was on the floor, but anyway, he was about this far away. And, yeah. I don't know if you can get away from it. It's why people, like, they want autographs or something, but, they want to touch a celebrity or, some well-known actor or something. Get his or her autograph. And same thing. You have the autograph now, like, oh, this is, they signed this. It becomes a reliquary. The autograph. Yeah. So, yeah. I just want to say that. You like my jacket? It's a nice summer jacket. I just told you my jacket's nice. It is nice. It's the only light color one I have. Yeah, I like it. And you should too. Yeah, next episode will be Vietnam. It's gonna be a good one. I hope this wasn't too meandery, this episode on What is Art. I just wanted to talk about art. But hopefully you picked up a couple things along the way. I think I talked about everything. I'm kind of looking at my list of images that I want to share. Yeah, I think I did everything. Okay. Coming up, Vietnam War. I'm not going to talk about the war. Like, I'm not going to talk about, like, events in the war. Like, I'm not going to talk about the Gulf of Tonkin. I'm not going to talk about the Phoenix program. I'm not going to talk about the Tet Offensive. I'm not going to talk about the My Lai massacre. I want to talk about why it happened. Why the United States bombed the living hell out of that poor country. That's what we're going to talk about. Not the war itself. Just why it happened. That's what I want to focus on. And Leo, I bet I can score you a 3D printed skull if you're interested. Let me know. Okay. I don't know how long this episode's been, but seems like it was reasonable-ish. Okay. Thank you for joining us on The Inquiry.